Now we're going to move on to pricing. I know Susan and Jody touched on a couple legal aspects of pricing, but we've got the lovely and talented Marcia Lindquist and her counterpart today, Michael Gallo. These two are a dynamic duo. We're very fortunate to have them with us, along with all of our other speakers today, a lot of rock stars here. And I'm going to stop talking in the interest of time. And Marcia, the floor is all yours.
Well, I'll just have one quick thing to introduce. I've been supporting the GovCon market with pricing strategy and cost accounting for over 30 plus years. In my book, Secrets of Strategic Pricing for Government Contractors, you will find many tools and processes for strategic pricing federal proposals. I'll turn it over to Mike, my wonderful colleague.
Great. Thanks, Marcia. Michael, over to you.
Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mike Gallo with Federal Pricing Group. Federal Pricing Group is a boutique consulting firm. We specialize in federal contracts pricing, and we provide advisory, training, and hands-on consulting support services to both government primes and to government subcontractors. I'm happy to be here today.
Great. Thank you both. I'm going to mute myself and just let me know when you're ready for the next slide.
We're ready. So in this slide, there's a really important message which is right at the top, and that everybody wins when everybody plays right in the sandbox. We didn't put that in there, but that's what we mean. Here's the thing about subcontractors. You really need to be part of the pricing dialogue, and you need to petition with your prime to do that, because otherwise prime contractors will decide a lot of things themselves. They will not necessarily invite teammates into the pricing strategy. But if you ask to be included, particularly if you have important input either about your customer, about information that you have about the proposal that you're going after, it's important for you to say something to your prime contractor and become part of that dialogue of what's going to be involved in the pricing and the pricing strategy. It's really important to know that the team needs to cooperate, not only with the prime, but also one another. If you are part of the team, you need to help craft the right price. Now, what do I mean by that? The right price doesn't happen by accident, okay? If the prime wins, you win. And you want that to happen. Otherwise, why would you even bid in the first place? All teammates need to cooperate on providing timely data to the prime contractor, getting to an agreeable price, and supporting all the requests for the government requirements, because it's not just the prime who has the requirements to submit, it's you too as the subcontractor. Every party has to have their own responsibilities in the team pricing effort. Everybody has a role. And while the prime may have targets for you, and they won't necessarily share it right away, each subcontractor has a role in crafting their price, their best price, and not exceeding their overall target, which you will either get from your prime or ask the prime for, okay? So subcontractors must adhere strictly to the letter of the RFP requirements. And I'll tell you, and Mike will attest to this too, there have been protests where subcontractors do not submit all the data required by the RFP, and the bid gets thrown out. So, Mike, I'm going to turn it to you right now.
Thanks, Marcia. And I think one thing that subcontractors need to appreciate is, in a typical proposal, the prime is delivering one proposal when we talk about the technical and management volumes, but that's not true for pricing. We're literally, if you had 5 subcontractors on the team, it's 6 pricing proposals potentially that are getting submitted to the government. It's the primes who's got everybody, and then every individual subcontractor potentially is also having to submit separate pricing information that the government evaluators will look at. So it's a much more complicated beast than when we're talking about the other proposal volumes. And one of the reasons why it's such a challenge for the prime to herd all these cats essentially when they're building pricing. So why don't we move on to the next slide?
So this is an important piece that's critical for all subcontractors to understand. You can rack the price or you can make it a win. You individually, yes, may be an important ingredient in making something a win. If you hold out to get your desired price, you would get on the wrong side of the prime contractor, most importantly. You would delay the price green team reviews, and you would hinder the team's ability to pivot on price quickly and reasonably. You must be able to, how could I say this, negotiate and work with the prime to achieve the right balance, but holding out is never a good thing. Mike, over to you.
Thanks. Yeah, and I think you really need to have an appreciation for the kind of risks that the prime contractor takes on when they invite you to be part of the bidding team. And that's especially true. That risk is especially true if it's a new relationship where the prime really doesn't have experience with you, the subcontractor. You can look at GAO protests. Marcia mentioned, how a subcontractor can really wreck the pricing. One of the examples, the subcontractor had to submit their own package because it contained proprietary data, and they elected to submit that information directly to the government. And they failed to upload their pricing proposal to the government portal until after the proposal due date, the overall due date. And consequently, the evaluators did not have the information available to evaluate the prime's pricing proposal because the subcontractor's pricing data was not allowed to be introduced into the evaluation. And guess what? The entire proposal was thrown out. So not only does the sub lose, but ultimately the prime and the rest of the teammates because of that. So it's really essential that subcontractors understand both the prime contractor's pricing responsibilities in this process, as well as their own responsibilities as a subcontractor. And Marcia and I are going to go over some of those responsibilities on the next two slides.
Right. So let's go over to the next slide where we talk about the prime's pricing responsibilities. You can see from this long list that the prime has quite a bit, and we haven't even listed everything here. Okay, I do want to really hone in on that first point because the prime ultimately has the responsibility to submit a compliant proposal and do it timely. By the way, so do the subs, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But when you are the prime, you have to respect the fact that you have to help the prime achieve their proposal objectives with all the data on time, complete, and correct. So you have a responsibility to your prime contractor to help them help you and help the team. Their responsibility is to assemble all the ingredients into a compliant proposal, and they make it easy for the contracting officer and the rest of the evaluators to evaluate the total proposal. So you can see here, there's a long list of things here. But again, the prime has a huge responsibility to making the price proposal something that the government will go, aha, we have everything that we need. Mike, on to you.
Yeah, Marcia, this really is a jigsaw puzzle for the prime to fit all these pieces together. And you, the subcontractor, really have a lot less headaches than the prime does. One of the headaches that the prime has is they are responsible for also documenting that how they found your subcontractor price fair and reasonable on behalf of the government. And that means the prime is ultimately going to be looking to you, subcontractor, to provide extra details on your cost and pricing to help them make those sorts of determinations. And you should be expecting them to ask those questions, and you should be expecting to have to defend your pricing to the prime contractor to help them make that determination. Jennifer's webinar series is going to review the 40 largest prime contractors, and all those primes are going to have mature procurement systems and processes in place and procedures for soliciting subcontractor pricing data, and they have resources to help you do that and submit a good bid. That's not necessarily going to be true for the other smaller primes that are out there that you might do business with. And they may, in fact, neglect their responsibilities to do this due diligence. So remember this, just because a prime doesn't request this additional data from you, it doesn't mean either of you are off the hook ultimately in the prime having to make those determinations and document that for the government. And if they don't, the government still will come in and ask for that information ultimately during evaluations.
And
So
Mike, I just one last point that I want
yeah,
to underline here, and that is that you have to respect that the prime has that responsibility to conduct cost or price analyses and support them, because the more you support them, the better off they are going to be able to defend not only yours but the entire proposal. Go ahead, Mike. I'm sorry.
absolutely. I know, and so that's definitely part of the subcontractor's responsibility too in this process, which we're going to cover in the next slide. And I'll kick things off, Marcia.
Okay.
There's quite a list for subcontractors as well in terms of what their responsibilities are in this process. And I'd like to just touch on that first one, which actually was talked about in the previous presentation too, in terms of subcontractors really need to understand contract types. And here, Marcia and I are talking about pricing types of contracts. So either it's a cost reimbursement type contract, it's a fixed price type contract, or it's a time and materials type contract. Each of them comes with their own pricing strategies and risk profile, and they each have implications in terms of documentation requirements ultimately in proposal submissions. It's really important that you, the subcontractor, have a firm grip and understand what each of these contract types means and how it is going to affect you, the subcontractor. And this is especially true in the case if you're going to get involved in having a cost type subcontract, then all the rules that you heard about in terms of allowability and allocability goes up a notch, because you're going to have to provide documentation to the government to demonstrate that your proposed costs meet all that criteria definition, and there's extra time and effort in doing so. Marcia, what would you emphasize on this list?
Well, on this one, I want to talk about number 3 in particular and number 4, but I want to caution the subcontractors out there that you have to keep in mind that the right price is what the entire team needs to win, not just yours. So if everybody doesn't play nice in the sandbox, back to our earlier slide, then the team may not win. You know, you must be able to negotiate with your prime to achieve the right balance for you and your company, but you also have to keep in mind that it's not just you. But most importantly here, you have to fully understand the RFP requirements, okay? What does that mean? Too often I hear subcontractors say, well, here are my numbers, see you later. And that's not the case. You need to ask questions of your prime and be sure you understand that you, most times, have the same requirements for data as the prime does. Oftentimes in the RFP, it will state that the subcontractor needs to adhere to the same requirements that the prime does. So read the RFP, particularly that section L and that section M, because it will say that right in there, okay? If that's the case, you need to read and digest what you're doing and put it into a compliance matrix, all the detailed requirements that you've got. In fact, sometimes I say to subcontractors, why don't you ask your prime contractor for their compliance matrix for the price volume, because you have to do the same thing. Because you are the subcontractor does not absolve you of your responsibilities for data submittals, sometimes including written price text, information that the government is looking for on you. Mike already talked about how an entire bid was tossed out because the subcontractor didn't submit that data in time. Now, I will talk about participating in price strategy and the preliminary pricing. What do I mean by that? I would encourage you to talk with your prime to include you in their pricing strategy sessions, because you have a better chance of helping the team if you as a subcontractor know what's going on and have a voice in it. A lot of prime contractors won't allow you into that, but I like to encourage subcontractors to invite, find out if they can be invited into that discussion. Give your prime contractor preliminary pricing, even if they've not asked for it. If you've signed a teaming agreement, you can share pricing information with your prime and help them shape the right price with your early participation. The sooner you can get involved in the pricing process, the better chance you as the team not only will get to the right price, but you as a subcontractor will be seen as a big asset for the team. Mike, you've got things you want to say on this slide too.
Yeah, I think the other punchline, and if you are participating actively in the process, you should be getting to a point where you can agree on price with the prime as you march towards proposal submission. And that's so important. You really don't want to put the prime in the position where, we're getting to the end and still not have reached agreement on pricing. The prime is still going to submit the proposal, and you really don't want to put them in the uncomfortable position of having to represent a price for your part of the contract that differs from what you think it is. You've just invited the government to open discussions to address the discrepancy, and you've decreased your chances potentially of winning the contract if the government decides ultimately they don't even want to enter into discussions with you to resolve it. If there's another team that already has their pricing fully resolved, and the other aspects of that other team's proposal looks pretty good to the government, you could put yourself in a situation where you don't get that second chance to resolve that issue. So actively participating in those pricing dialogues and being accommodative to reach a good agreement on pricing with the prime is essential. Let's go ahead and move on.
Right.
And Marcia touched on pricing. Marcia, why don't you continue that thought on the process?
Let me talk about the process just a wee bit. The process really breaks down into pre-RFP stage, an RFP stage, and a post-RFP stage for simplicity. Okay? Mike and I are really big fans, shall we say, of early pricing involvement. That means in the pre-RFP stage, you are involved, even if you're a subcontractor, in obtaining all of these things that we've got listed here on the left-hand side. You would want to be involved in the customer research, knowledge of their pricing habits and their hot buttons about price. You would want to be involved in pricing data calls, because that's where, like Mike was talking about, all of those early decisions and working out the right price happens. It happens early in the game. It should not happen late in the game, because you want to give your prime data in the draft stage of a proposal, and that allows you to have those open discussions about price early on, so that you don't wait for the data between you to flow at a later date. You want to have those discussions. The draft RFP is where you could be able to and should be able to get into your own internal modeling started. This is where you research information about salaries, or you take a look at your own indirect rates, or maybe you need to augment your discussion about salary, or get information about other direct costs, or information that will allow you to make intelligent decisions about your pricing sooner rather than later. If your technical people are involved in solutioning, this is where you get to engage with not only your team, but the prime contractor as well on the pricing solution, so that the team doesn't envision something so lofty that you've got to cut back and make last minute decisions. This is where you can provide data when you have it, so that it allows for an early, easy flowing discussion between you and the prime contractor. And again, draft pricing strategy that we talk about is where you begin to strategize as an active member of the team on the pricing direction, so that you can help shape the final price. Your homework, like we've got down there at the bottom, just can't wait for the final RFP, because this is where a lot of the decisions and judgments get made, is in the pre-RFP stage. Mike, I know you've got some great things to say here.
Yes, so in the next stage in the RFP, when that drops, for the prime, it's a mad dash to get everything assembled and the pricing, in one piece. And pricing is one of the worst headaches for the prime. Did we mention before, Marcia, that there's not one proposal, there's many proposals when it comes to
right,
the pricing.
right.
So yes, the prime is going to be unreasonable when they come to you and ask for your pricing submission at a date that's earlier than you want to provide it, much earlier than the ultimate due date. And that's because the prime has this responsibility to integrate all these pieces together and fit them all together into a whole. I would also say, by the same token, all the homework that Marcia mentioned in the pre-RFP stage and all the drills that the prime has to go through once the final drop, it's a lot of pressure and a little bit of time. By the same token, I would say if it's the first time you're hearing from prime is when the final RFP drops about an opportunity, you might want to very carefully consider whether or not it's worth your time, money, and energy to participate in the bid. If this is the first time the prime is approaching you and the RFP is already on the street, you might be better off waiting for a better opportunity. And that's just some food for thought. Don't also forget, once the proposal is submitted, you may not be complete with your pricing. Depending on whether or not the government wants to get clarifications and or enter into discussions and ask for revised pricing, some of that might fall back on you, the subcontractor, because there's questions about your pricing submission. So be ready to support your prime contractor if and when any discussion questions come out from the government. The pressure was bad when the final RFP came out. It's even more intense when the government enters into discussions because the timelines sometimes are very brief. So be ready to be fully supportive of your prime contractor if the government asks questions and asks for pricing revisions.
So, Mike, before we move on to the next slide, I want to make an important point here, okay? And that's where we talk about pricing reviews, okay? If you are engaging in those pricing reviews with your prime contractor throughout the process, it should not come as a big surprise in the post-RFP stage that they are maybe asking you for some concessions on your price afterwards,
right.
Perhaps for a best and final. So if you are engaging all along in the pricing strategy and you're having those pricing discussions all along and early on as well, then hopefully it should not come as a big surprise to you that they are going to be asking you for something. Presumably, they should be engaging in those discussions in a very constructive way.
Totally agree.
Okay, so let's move on to our last slide where we wrap up. And in this particular slide, Mike, I know you like some of the. Let me let you do some of the do's. Okay.
Okay. Yes. So we've kind of summarized everything from our previous content, some key do's and don'ts. On the do side, Marcia mentioned the pricing data calls. I think that's really important to timely submit and answer those data calls. Sometimes they're piecemeal and they're pieces of information that the prime is looking from you to get the process started. Answer those data calls, be complete in your responses and be timely. It's in your best interest. If the prime asks, for example, for a rate card with rates for various labor categories, give them what they request, bill in as much as you think you can actually execute, and put yourself in the position to maybe pick up some more work for the prime and doing the prime a favor, because if your pricing is very competitive, you might actually be helping them early in the stage develop a good pricing solution where maybe you might get some more work out of the deal because you were prompt and complete and thorough in your responses. Marsh, if you don't mind, I'd like to jump over to one of the don'ts that's also hot on my list.
Okay.
And that's the first one in terms of proprietary data. You as a subcontractor should not be submitting proprietary pricing data to the prime. And the prime sometimes might just ask for it that way because the government is asking for that details. It's not in your interest ultimately long-term to provide that data directly to the prime. They're a teammate today, they may be a competitor tomorrow. And if you give them that information, you're helping them giving them the tools essentially to figure out your pricing potentially on a future competition. So you should take the steps to be separating that information and disclosing that through a proper channel, either as a sealed submission package that the prime will give to the government on your behalf, or you submitting that information directly to the government and making sure that you submit it on time and don't ruin the prime's overall bid. Marcia, you want to emphasize a couple?
Yeah, I do. In particular, on the do side, I want to make sure, and I've probably said it too much here, but definitely participate in pricing dialogue with your prime contractor, okay? And it's really critical that you have that discussion, because you don't want it to just be from the prime, here are your targets, or here is your target, get to that number. You would like to understand what's behind it, because presumably that kind of conversation, let me say this, silent subcontractors often do not get the work share that they want. But by participating in the pricing dialogue, you have your own voice heard and get to shape the direction of the team's pricing goals, okay? One other thing on the do side I want to emphasize, Mike, and that is to reread and re-review all of the things that you are required to do. Make that last-minute connection with your own compliance matrix to make sure you do everything that you're supposed to do. On the don't side, I'm going to say, Mike, don't hold the prime hostage. I have been in that situation where I have been working with a prime, and the prime, the subcontractor held out. They held out till like a day before, 2 days before, with their pricing, because they were trying to not get a cut from the prime contractor. Don't do that to them. Keeping your price details to yourself will not endear you to your prime or the rest of the teammates, because by holding out on the price data, you put the prime at risk of not achieving the team price goal, and that's got to happen. Mike?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the other don'ts here as we wrap up is you really want to be careful about getting into situations where you're going to enter into a cost type subcontract. If you're a small business, odds are likely that you don't have experience and your accounting system might not be adequate yet to handle cost type contracts. It's a whole other level of burden, and in terms of administrative burden and proposal pricing preparation burden to do a cost type contract. So if a prime is asking you to enter into a cost type subcontract, please take the time to understand what you're getting yourself involved into and make sure ahead of time that your systems are set up properly to handle cost type contracts.
Excellent. Yep. I think, Jennifer, that's what we've got for today.
All right, Marcia and Michael, the dynamic duo covering pricing. That was excellent, outstanding as usual. So thank you guys for taking the time to put together the great materials that you did. I liked your slides a lot and your content, and excellent delivery. So any last thoughts before we move on to compliance from either of you?
I think we've got it. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Jennifer.
Great, thank you both, and see you maybe on the other side. Now we're going to dig into compliance. This is our final session. As a reminder, today's webinar is being recorded. If you go over to our website, which is simply jenniferschaus.com, at the top right-hand corner, there's a link to go over to YouTube. If you subscribe to our YouTube channel, it doesn't cost you anything. You'll get access to 600 plus, almost 600, government contracting webinars. And if you subscribe, you'll get an alert as soon as today's webinar is uploaded. We'll also email that out to you with the link, and you'll get a copy of the slides, which can be found right now actually on slideshare.net. Just find our page over there, Jennifer Schaus, and all of our webinar PowerPoints are there. So last but not least, we're getting ready